Hey guys, Anfield here, welcome back to another video. Today's video we're going to be looking at the Ranger Succession add-ons. Now of course, as soon as I released the Awakening add-ons guide, I was sort of instantly hit with the question about when the Succession add-on guide was coming, so this is that video. So Succession add-ons are going to follow the same kind of principle as the Awakening ones in terms of how you decide what you're going to pick for Succession. It's a very similar process and all comes down to the kind of skills that you use at the specific grind spots that you're going to, what you need to enhance to pick up on the speed of grinding there, and so forth. So we're going to focus on PvE first and then move on to PvP, and with the end of this video I hope that it'll at least help you to think more critically about what add-ons you want to take rather than just plain copy paste of some add-ons sheet that you find. Okay, so this is a basic Succession PvE add-on list. This is what I have saved, so when I swap into Succession for PvE, this is what would come up, and then I would just tailor this depending on the grind spot. Like we talked about in the Awakening add-on list, there's some grind spots that would require different things and would be beneficial at different areas, so I always tailor this depending. I don't usually go out and just keep this, so keep that in mind. So the obvious one here is Charging Wind. I think it has to be here because Charging Wind is the only tier 3 in Succession. Like Awakening has 2 tier 2s, or tier 3s, excuse me, whereas the Succession only has the 1. Now, with the previous add-on system, it would have technically had the equivalent to 2, with I think both Tremble and Regeneration were what we would consider tier 3 now. But there's only the one, and that's Charging Wind, so you have to take it. I have monster damage 30 and minus DP, so that's giving you 30 AP, minusing their DP by 20. I think this is nice. So this is what I usually go for with Charging Wind because I think you have to take it. It also doesn't have a hard cooldown, so you can use as much as you want. You use it a lot in grinding, so I think it's too important not to take it. So this is a given. Could you swap any of this out? Maybe. If you feel like the monsters you're grinding have high evasion, you could go minus evasion to see if that's better than the minus 20 DP. I'm not sure that it would be, but you could always test it out yourself to get a feeling for it. So Charging Wind has to be there. The rest of it, though, this is where you could start getting a little bit more variety. Will of the Wind is always going to be useful because Will of the Wind is a skill that is just a DPS that has no hard cooldown. It is very resource intensive, Will of the Wind. So I have it on here, minus DP again, crit damage. This is again, crit damage is on here and not down attack because it's not assumed that I'm grinding Star's End with the setup. I could be grinding Sakurai, in which case down attack is completely useless. This would be true of Kratuga and Histria, but not Akhman. So Akhman, Star's End, anywhere where you knock the mobs down, Abandoned Monastery maybe, like these spots you can go for down attack, but otherwise you'd probably just go for critical hit. Although you do usually want to give Will of the Wind some bonus critical hit rate if you are going to do this, which usually I throw in here if I'm decided I'm going to grind Sakurai or something. I'll give myself critical hit rate somewhere. So again, this isn't just something you should take. You should think about it before you click these skills. So think about the skills you're using and things like that and whether they have 100% crit or not. Okay, so Razor Wind. I have Razor Wind in here because okay, so when you use Charging Wind in PvE, typically what it is after Razor Wind, using the animation cancel of Kiss of the Wind, which allows you to use Penetrating Wind and Charging Wind after a skill. So the reason that Razor Wind has monster damage 20 and critical hit damage 5 seconds is because right after Razor Wind, I'm going to use Penetrating Wind and Charging Wind. Now, between the two skills, Penetrating Wind is the skill that hits the hardest, and so I want extra critical damage, and I want it to be paired with the extra monster damage. Also, if I'm using Razor Wind and consistently using it, not releasing the skill instantly, then the monster damage will apply not only to Razor Wind itself, or well, to the skills after, but also Razor Wind itself. So that's why that's there. This is not necessarily something you need to take. This could be swapped out with Penetrating Wind if you wanted to. But I wanted something that would benefit Penetrating Wind, and since Charging Wind is used with Penetrating Wind, in fact I think it comes second after when you do Shift LMB RMB, I'm pretty sure Charging Wind is second, in which case you realistically don't get a benefit from having Charging Wind boost up Penetrating Wind, you know, because this would be great if I use Charging Wind and then use Penetrating Wind. I guess that would be nice too, but that's just not happening when you're using the skills. So what that looks like, just to explain quickly, is at endgame spots you might want to, depending on your AP, you might want to fully launch Razor Wind like this, and then that's Shift L and B, R and B to activate Penetrating Wind and Charging Wind next to each other, okay? So you can launch this immediately if you wanted to. Although if you do that, just keep in mind that the Razor Wind add-on will not work, but it might be something you want to do. Now, if you do decide to do this more than this, then what you might want to do is remove Razor Wind as a skill add-on, in which case take something else. Penetrating Wind is fine because you're still going to probably be doing damage with other skills right after that. So in this case, I would just go, okay, I'm only pressing E and then Shift L and B, R and B, so I'm going to take Penetrating Wind instead as an add-on, which is a tier 2 add-on, so it's still pretty good. Okay, so moving on, we have Evasive Explosive Shot. This is good because using Prime Evasive Explosive Shot is actually decent damage, and you're using it to like sort of position yourself differently, and so that's fine. So I have that on there because I'm using it a decent amount to reposition myself while grinding sometimes. But if you are specifically staying in front of the mob, since Ranger Succession especially doesn't get any back attacks, then you don't want to take Evasive Explosive Shot. You probably want to take something else. Like I said, I don't have Penetrating Wind, I could throw that in there. Evasive Shot is specifically for Shotgun, but you're not usually using Shotgun to grind endgame, so I don't know about that. So you're running out of options, really. You could run Blasting Gust as well. Again, Blasting Gust, tier 1 add-on, but you are using it all the time because of the ranged, or well, not the range, but the evasion debuff is very, very nice. So that's an option for you too. And down at the bottom, I have Prime Tremble, Prime Regeneration. I think these skills are very important for grinding endgame. You're going to use them all the time as extra filler because the mobs are so tanky that unless you have a really big AP for the grind spot you're at, realistically, you're not going to have enough with the big nuke skills, which is pretty much just Kiss of the Wind, that's Razor Wind into Penetrating Wind, and then, yeah, well, Prime Ultimate Blasting Gust, basically. That's really it. Like, there isn't really the kind of filler that you have with the Awakening, so this skill can't be added on, so you just want to basically, if you're running out of damage, basically, these are okay to use. So I have Casting Speed, Critical Hit Damage. This is not necessarily something I would always take. This depends. The reason I have attack speed on here is just because I didn't have it anywhere else. Not necessarily because it's great for this skill. And then critical hit damage again. The reason there's so much critical hit damage, just to explain this, you can see it quite a lot here. The reason there's so much is because, well, with Succession, most of the skills, if you look at them, have 100% crit rate. So having critical hit rate damage, because you can only get down attack with Succession. You're never going to get back attacks. It just isn't going to happen. The Awakening can kind of wing it sometimes, but you're not going to get it. So if we look at some of these skills, not Razor Wind, but where's Penetrating Wind? Okay, Penetrating Wind, 100% crit rate, right? And then if we go to Prime Ultimate Blasting Gust, 100% crit rate. So what you're looking at with the Succession specifically is a lot of skills that have 100% crit rate. So you don't need bonus crit rate, but what you do need is bonus crit damage. So think about these kind of things while you're putting in putting these skill add-ons. What am I benefiting from? Well, if I'm not getting down attacks, but I do have 100% crit rate, I want to boost that crit rate, right? So that's why this is on here. So regeneration you're going to use because it's not. Succession doesn't have Vine Knot. It only has regeneration to boost attack speed, right? So if I use regeneration, there's the attack speed, right? That's very important. So it has to be in here, I think, because you are going to use it all the time for the attack speed bonus. And then I just put monster damage 20 and minus DP 15, so it's like a discount version of Charging Wind. So this is something that you might want to experiment with. You might want to remove this and change it to other things. Maybe minus evasion and things to pair with the minus DP because charging, you're always in bow form, right? So there's no awkwardness of being in Awakening all the time. Well, that spec obviously. So you can, let me just lock my Black Spirit Rage this time. You can always go like this, right? To constantly refresh the Charging Wind add-on, right? You don't ever need to have that out. Now, I don't recommend you do that. I recommend you do this instead, right? I'm just saying that you can always refresh this. So that should never really be let off. So in which case, if you're always having 30 monster damage, minus 20 DP from Charging Wind, you don't need it anywhere else. The only reason you would take it anywhere else is just to supplement any laziness or slack grinding, which is okay in some cases, I suppose, if you're just like really AFK grinding and you don't want to consistently be spamming Charging Wind. So this is just some things to think about, right? At the end of the day, it comes down to what skills you're using at the grind spot, how geared you are for the grind spot, which is even more important than the awakening to consider, because succession changes dramatically on what skill rotations you use based on how much damage you do to the mobs, because it's all about nuke damage. Awakening has much more filler. It's about buffs and debuffs and attack speed. Succession is much more about how much nuke damage do I have. Specifically, how much damage do I really do with things like this, like that, right? And that's what it really comes down to. How much damage you doing that? Because if you do enough damage, you don't need supplemental skills like Will the Wind. In which case, you definitely want to take Blasting Gust, because you're always going to use Blasting Gust. I mean, you might pull with Descending Current, depending on the grind spot. Some grind spots you might not want to. But ultimately, you're still going to use Blasting Gust on the mobs to get that quick evasion debuff. So that's it. That's a Succession PvE in a nutshell. I hope that helps you kind of consider what you might want to take. And, you know, think about, okay, where am I grinding, right? Because if I'm grinding somewhere, like I talked about in the Awakening video, if I'm grinding somewhere where I one-hit the mobs, I don't need monster damage and DP. What do I need? Okay, well, I'm going to maybe use these skills still, but maybe I want movement speed, and maybe I want attack speed, because I don't need more damage, I just need to move around the mobs and stuff faster. So if you're one-hitting the mobs, grinding potion pieces, I would recommend throwing in a bunch of movement speed and a casting speed, or attack speed, sorry. So that's that. Okay, so let's talk about PvP. This is where style, flair, and preference really kick into high gear. Your skills that you pick are relatively going to look similar to this, with the exception of maybe Razor Wind being in there, or potentially Evasive Shot for Shotgun, although that gets finicky when you have Riding the Wind. So this is pretty much the skills you're going to take. But what will you take for the add-ons? That's the important question. Charging Wind here, tier 3. So obviously tier 3, this is where your biggest benefits come from with add-ons. Something to consider for sure. So I have minus DP, minus movement speed. That's because classes in this game move way too fast, and that's why Succession Ranger can sometimes struggle, especially 1v1, because classes are hella fast. That, and they have their own range CCs that are sometimes better than ours. Anyway, so minus DP, this is because I might throw Charging Wind out there while I'm kiting, and that just increases the damage. And also I might use Shotgun after Charging Wind, so minus DP is good for that. Movement speed 10% for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a pretty decently long time, and minus 10% movement speed is a pretty nice reduction to help keep you away from your opponent. So realistically, you might be Blasting Gust kiting. You might feel you have a little bit of time, and you go like that, right? So just a quick either Sharp Feather or that which was Kiss of the Wind, right? This is Kiss of the Wind. So if you throw that in there when you feel you have some space, you might be able to slow your opponent and gain more advantage over them. You don't want to use that while you're about to be caught up to, in which case you're probably going to use ES. Again, I have movement speed here. We'll talk about that in a second, though. Will of the Wind, this is just in case which does happen. I need to use Will of the Wind because I'm in a melee knockdown position. I've knocked them down, and Will of the Wind is still pretty good DPS for that. So minus evasion, down attack damage. Again, down attack because they're on the floor. So minus evasion, I just like that because I think it helps. But you could do attack speed benefit. I mean, you could do anything really. There's a couple options here, but Will of the Wind would only be replaced by, congrats to that guy, Razor the Wind. Razor Wind is a good forward guard, and that's probably the only skill I would replace it with. So that's up to you. You could throw Razor Wind in there if you want to. I would use Razor Wind 100% if you were sieging. So this is like an open world thing, but if you were sieging, I would use Razor Wind. Add-ons 100%, not Will of the Wind. There's really not going to be a position you can use Will of the Wind in a large-scale fight like a siege or a big node war. So in that case, use Razor Wind. Tearing Arrow. This is, like I said in the Ranger Succession guide I made, this is your hardest hitting ability, so I want to focus on that by lowering enemy defenses by DP and evasion. So this is really nice and something that I personally like, but you could do anything else. So this has a lot of options here because of what you use with Tearing Arrow, not just Tearing Arrow with the ability. Like if you use Tearing Arrow, right, you're using it like this. That first hit is already going to give you the add-on, right? So the remaining hits benefit from that, but not just that. You also benefit because you're going to use Penetrating Wind and Charging Wind afterwards often, and then even Shotgun. So anything you do after Penetrating Wind like that is all going to benefit from the fact that you put an add-on onto Tearing Arrow. So consider those skills that you're going to use after Tearing Arrow for what you might. So minusing their defenses I think really helps, but you could do anything. I mean, if I didn't put it elsewhere, you could put a bleed on there. Bleed is kind of underrated. It really helps prevent the enemy from healing effectively, so that's something you could do. You could do accuracy and PvP damage to yourself, which is like the opposite of what I have. More than reasonable. There's no reason you don't need to take that. Critical hit damage, potentially also very good because it's 100% crit rate skill, and so is penetrating wind. So that's going to increase the damage both those skills too. So all these options are good. You could do movement speed, but I have movement speed on charging wind, so that's why it's not there. Tearing Arrow has its own bleed and movement speed reduction on it, so if you're landing that, that's really good. Moving down, penetrating wind. So penetrating wind is obviously, like Tearing Arrow, an important skill for damage, but I don't think it really benefits from its own add-ons. I'm not entirely sure when it comes to a skill that has multiple hits. I think it has 4 hits, penetrating wind, but they all come at the same time, so I'm not sure if like one hit is technically in front of the others and does benefit add-ons. I don't know. Either way, I just went with something that I would know would be beneficial elsewhere. So bleed damage, like I talked about, kind of underrated, pretty useful. And accuracy, I rate accuracy because I have Libras, so that's why I have an accuracy earring right now, and I will eventually have a turbo belt also. So accuracy for me is beneficial. Evasive explosive shot, this is your oh shit button, and evasive explosive shot is very, very useful. It has to be on here. It's super important. I went with movement speed to myself and minus movement speed to your opponent. Again, so if someone's close enough that you have to EES, hopefully that will help you get away from them. So that's why that's on there. And then Blasting Gust is, well, I went with a little bit of an annoying build for Blasting Gust. So I went with reducing WP, MP, or SP. This is because a lot of characters in this game use those things for their chase abilities. That is, their mobility and ability to chase you is using those resources. Not always stamina. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it is just stamina, like the Ranger Awakening dash. But if you look at Musa Mewa, they do use MP, WP, and SP also, not just stamina. So this can be a little bit facetious while you're kiting backwards and you're just. It only has 2 hits on it, Blasting Gust, but because you fire it so fast, you can really annoy someone with that. So air attack damage is the last thing I have on here, and that's purely because it'll benefit penetrating wind, right? If I use Sharp Feather, which is when I'm usually using Blasting Gust, and then you kick. I can't do it because you have to hit a target, but you kick, and then shift L and B, R and B, and then you're hopefully knocking an opponent on the floor, but before they hit the floor, you've already hit penetrating wind, which benefits hugely from the air attack modifier, so air attack damage. So that's it. That's PvP. That's what I have. It's up to you what you take. Like I said, there's so many different options, and it comes down to playstyle and also the type of PvP you're doing. Like I said, I wouldn't take Will of the Wind if I was doing only Siege. I would take Razor Wind because it's a skill you're far more likely to use. So that's it. I hope that this was helpful to you guys. Again, like always, if you have any follow-up questions, just come by the stream and be like, Anfield, what about this? Or I'm doing this. Can you help me? I'm always happy to answer questions on the stream. So feel free to come by. But otherwise, hopefully I'll see you guys on the next video. Catch you later.